Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to all of you to today's discussion, Decrypting the Encryption Debate, how to ensure public safety with a privacy-preserving and secure internet. Our debate is co-hosted by Marcel Kolaja, who is Vice President of the European Parliament, an MEP with the Greens EFA group from Czechia, member of the IMCO committee and substitute of the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence, and Patrick Breyer, MEP with the Greens EFA group from Germany, member of the LIBE committee, where he's rapporteur for opinion for the DSA proposal, and he's also a substitute in the jury committee. Welcome to both of you, and thank you very much for taking the lead at this forum on this important topic. We have also invited 4 experts to join us today and share their different perspectives on the ongoing encryption debate. Let's welcome them all. So warm welcome to our speakers, starting with Guillaume Poupard, who is Director General at the French National Cybersecurity Agency. We're also joined by Bruce Schneier, who is an American cryptographer, computer security professional, privacy specialist, and writer. A warm welcome. Alexander Hanff is also joining us, who is co-founder and CEO of Think Privacy. And we're joined also by Neeti Biyani, who's policy and advocacy manager at the Internet Society. Thank you all very much for joining us. As usual, we will listen to our guests first, and then we will kick off an exchange of views in the Q&A session, where all participants will be invited to join and very welcome to do that. Now, with no further ado, I'll leave the floor to our MEPs, Marcel Kolaja and Patrick Breyer, for their opening remarks. Marcel.
Thank you for the floor. And I will also like to thank the EIF for organizing this extremely important and timely event on encryption. Of course, I'd like to thank to our speakers and last but not least to our audience. And please let me kick off by saying that privacy is indispensable for any democratic political system. It's a key enabler for individuals to practice and enjoy other fundamental rights, to enable free exchange of ideas. And that is why the topic of encryption is especially important for me. In the current NIS 2 directive, we have been working in the Internal Market Committee on ways to make security of critical infrastructure and of important services stronger. We are trying to incentivize member states to promote, but also companies to make use of strong and state-of-the-art encryption and cryptography, and to encourage all players to develop cybersecurity skills. Unfortunately, in parallel to this initiative, we see other legislation moving forward that would have an impact contrary to this objective. This legislation would have an adverse effect on both consumer protection as well as innovation and the functioning of the internal market. Why? First, because consumers would lose control over the service they use and ultimately their own communications. And second, because companies would no longer be allowed to deliver services with a secure design as they would wish. They would be forced to deliver only illusion of security by so-called security by obscurity. And I am glad that we can discuss with our experts today how to have a coherent approach in these policies and what we can do to strengthen privacy and security of users. So thank you again, and I hand over back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Marcel, for setting the scene for today's debate and also providing a helpful overview of the initiatives that are out there. So, Patrick, over to you now.
Thank you, Maria, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm a long-time civil liberties and privacy activist. And citizens who constantly feel watched and under surveillance can no longer freely and courageously stand up for their rights and for a just society. So surveillance, distrust, and fear are gradually transforming our society into one of uncritical consumers who think they have nothing to hide and, in a vain attempt to achieve total security, are prepared to give up their freedoms. I don't want to live in such a world, and that is also my motivation for running for the European Parliament. But so much awareness and understanding is needed for lawmakers to get it right. And that's why we've called today's event Decrypting, the Encryption Debate. Only yesterday did I join a round table with government and EU officials on encryption. And their argumentation follows the lines of, we need to move the debate forward. The binary viewpoint that encryption either prevents all third-party access or generally allows for third-party access is extreme. Encryption can still be safe even if lawful access is possible with due process in place. It's just a matter of governance and trust. And you already trust your providers anyway with unencrypted communications, that they will only listen in if there is a court order, etc. So this is the argumentation that's being used. And I hope to hear today from our experts how they recommend we should balance the competing security needs and what your messages to policymakers is. I'm glad that Mr. Poupard, Ms. Biyani, and even Bruce Schneier have agreed to join our debate today. And it's high time to be having it. Because the proponents of breaking encryption are currently using an extremely emotional frame, the keeping our children safe from sexual abuse, to legitimize what will become the EU's first legislation on mass surveillance, and namely a dossier called e-privacy derogation that says providers will be providers of email, of messaging, and of chat services will be able to screen the content of every private message for alleged child pornography with high rates of false positives. This legislation will be voted at the beginning of July, and the Commission has already announced that it will follow up with legislation to make this screening mandatory. It's as if the post office opened all letters. So the need to protect our children is so pressing that we're willing to push limits for it. Some are willing even to consider torture or death penalty to protect children. So therefore, I'm glad that Mr. Hanff has joined us today, being himself a victim of child sexual abuse and a privacy professional, to discuss this issue, which could be the end of safe end-to-end encryption in commercial services. And with this introduction, I would like to hand back to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for sharing your thoughts on this important issue. And some of the keywords I've retained are actually trust and safety from what you said, which I think are also values very much at the core of our society. And like you said, the key question now is how to get it right, how to get the balance right. Let's hear from our experts, starting with Guillaume Poupard. Your microphone, Guillaume, please. Thank you.
We have been doing this for many months now, but still mistakes. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on this debate that is very important for me for two reasons. And maybe there's a bias in what I say because of what I do. But first of all, I'm a former cryptographer. So for me, crypto is something quite important. And I consider that it's a technology that is fully necessary to secure ourselves and to protect everything, including our privacy. So there's no doubt about this. And the other thing is that I'm now the head of the French National Authority for Cybersecurity. So I am on the security side. I work a lot with many colleagues in France and also around Europe who work on cybersecurity. There are intelligence services, police services, and people who try to secure everything. And of course, we have this debate related to crypto, the use of crypto. And I often observe that the debate is not good, because if we reduce the debate to are we in favor of privacy or are we in favor of security, of course, we won't find any solution. And even in many situations, I consider that we need to choose between security and security. And again, it's not the good way to develop a debate. And well, probably other people in the panel experience this, but I often faced people who are trying to reduce the debate to the fact that, of course, there are some bad people who use crypto to do awful things. But even if those people use crypto, if you protect crypto, you are not in favor of those people. If there are some people who do child abuse, awful things, using crypto systems to protect their communication, and if you protect crypto, it doesn't mean that you are in favor of child abuse. I say silly things, but I think sometimes the debate is as silly as this. So we need to avoid this. And again, thank you very much for this debate, because we need to talk about real solutions and, okay, what are the limits, what we can do and what we can't. And at the end, we need to do choices, just because the global security is the most important thing. And I put privacy into the security. Then when we look at the different solutions we often hear about, of course we know, and we have been knowing this for a long time, and of course Bruce will talk about this, but we know that simple solution like weakening crypto or using key escrow, you know, having some people having some special keys to decrypt some communications, we know that those solutions are very complex to develop. Weakening crypto doesn't work just because it is impossible to have systems with a level of security low enough to be decrypted by good people, let's say, investigators, for example, and not being able to be decrypted by criminals or bad guys. We know that, okay, this idea of good guys, bad guys is it's not technical. And sometimes the bad guys have an incredible amount of computing power and intelligence also. So it's not a solution. And very quickly, regarding key escrow, regarding this idea of having some decryption keys, I think that we cannot say it is impossible to do it. It's not a technical problem. It has been solved many years ago. But in practice, to be able to implement such schemes, okay, who will get the keys to be able to decrypt in case of problem? It's a real problem. So I don't say that I have a solution. I don't have a solution for sure. But we need to have a clear debate. If we have some ideas, to be able to try to let good guys use crypto, but not the bad guys. Well, for any idea to try to solve this problem, we need two things. The first one is that it must be clearly analyzed from a cybersecurity point of view to be sure that the solutions will not become a flaw, very dangerous for many people. So for this, we need to discuss about not big ideas, but about technical details, technical implementation, organizations, about those systems. My experience is that each time we did it, the conclusion was that the solution was not good. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it cannot be done in the dark. We need openness, transparency, and I'm convinced, but as all modern cryptographers, that only sharing the schemes, the ideas, there are just a few secrets in a system. Everything can be public. So whatever we do, we need to have this transparency in order to have independent experts, people from academic research being able to also to analyze what we try to do. And in many situations, well, openness is not the first priority. So we need to change the minds of the people who work in those domains. And then finally, whatever we do, we must have some limits. The main limits are that being able to access to decrypted communication must be exceptional. We must be very careful with the solution. It must not apply massively to many communications. We know that it's bad. We must be very careful on the systemic effect. For example, if some tools are developed, usually it is software tools, so it can be disseminated very quickly. So again, this must be analyzed by real experts, including independent experts, in order to be sure that the solution is not worse than the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your views and giving some of solutions for this hard nut to crack, actually. So we will now bring in another cryptographer, Bruce Schneier.
Hey, thanks for having me. I think Guillaume was really right when he talked about this not as security versus privacy, which is usually how it's presented, but security versus security. Right? There is security value in allowing the police access to this device in order to solve crimes. There's security value in keeping this device secure from everyone else who might want to eavesdrop on us. And that's what we have to balance. Now, what's important to know is that one world, one network, one answer. You know, you think back at the Cold War when we would be able to spy on the Warsaw Pact stuff and protect the NATO stuff. We could do that because it was different stuff. The radios were different, the computers were different, everything was different. Today, it's the same stuff. We all use Microsoft Windows, PDF files, iPhones, web pages. We all use the same systems and the same protocols. And we can either design this for security or design this for surveillance. And one answer, one world. Either everyone gets to spy or nobody gets to spy. I can't build a smartphone that operates differently depending on what legal piece of paper is nearby or the morals of the person using it. This doesn't know good guy, bad guy. This is tech, right? It knows bits, it knows numbers, it knows code. So in this world, it's important for security is that defense has to dominate. As long as this object is in the pocket of every single elected official and police officer and judge and CEO and nuclear power plant operator and election official, it is essential that this be secure. This is the de facto controller device of your Internet of Things everything. This is where everything you do is. And if I'm going to build this with some kind of access mechanism, call it a backdoor, call it lawful access, call it client-side scanning, whatever you want to call it, that mechanism technically is there and is available for others who want to use it. We have seen many examples of lawful access mechanisms being subverted by criminals, by other countries. And we were able to really think about that and possibly do it in the 90s. We can't do it today. Right? Everything is a computer. We are incredibly vulnerable in cyberspace. And in that world, defense has to win over offense. And I mean, you see this in many areas. I mean, not just in security of this phone. You see it in some of the protocols we use on the internet that are less secure than they should be, and we see them being subverted by the NSA, by the Chinese government. We see IMSI catchers, fake cell phone towers, first being used by the FBI in the United States, then being used by other countries to spy on each other, now being used by criminals. This is the mechanism. We have one world, one network, one answer, and in that world, defense has to win. So with that, I will stop and see you all at the question session.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Very, very clear message. Let's now give the floor to Alexander Hanff with Think Privacy.
Hi. I'm in a really interesting position because I'm a privacy guy. I've been working in privacy for a long time. I'm also a computer scientist and have a background in psychology and sociology as well. So my day job is working with companies to help them understand how to develop solutions which enhance the privacy rights of individuals using their services. It's a job I really enjoy. It's a job I'm really good at. I'm also an abuse survivor who survived some really horrific abuse as a child. And for me, when it comes to privacy, this isn't just about me doing my job. This is something which is incredibly personal. And the reason I do what I do instead of just working in tech is because it's so incredibly personal, and it's such an important thing for society in order to maintain the freedoms that we expect and have used for so long now. I remember when I gave my first privacy speech in London back in 2008, and at the end of my speech, an elderly gentleman stood up in his army uniform and said that, you know, if we give up privacy, all the people who he fought with in the Second World War, all his friends, families, brothers who died to give us these fundamental rights, did it for nothing. We're basically disgracing their sacrifice by giving these things up. And I think that's really one of the most poignant things to me, and sits with me to this day, and will sit with me for the rest of my life, and motivates me to do the work that I do. Because when we give up privacy, we don't just give up privacy. We give up all of the other freedoms which rely on it. Freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of opinion, everything that we do, freedom of thought, all the things that we take for granted, the things which we need to live in a democratic society, the things which make us innovative, the things which allow us to have self-awareness and self-identity and autonomy. All of these things rely on the ability to have privacy, because as soon as you lose privacy, you diminish the ability to have all of these other freedoms. This is incredibly important. And we don't want to live in a world where people don't have autonomy. Because if we live in a world where people don't have autonomy, we live in a world without innovation, because people no longer think for themselves. They do everything they're told to do. So we don't move forward as a society. We don't move forward as a species. The other thing which concerns me when we're talking about end-to-end encryption and the introduction of weaknesses or backdoors, etc., is it really doesn't move forward the discussion. It doesn't prevent the bad guys from doing bad things. They'll do bad things regardless. They'll go to different platforms. They'll use different technologies which are less easy to infiltrate, and they will still do the things that they do. My psychology teacher said to me when I was in university, he said, because I was struggling at the time, I was working on a thesis related to child sexual abuse and trafficking of child pornography online. And he said to me, he said, what would you do if you saw a child floating down the river, drowning in the river? I said, well, I'd jump in and I'd try and save the child. And he said to me, well, what if you see another child 5 minutes later, and then another child 3 minutes later, and then the children just keep coming? I said, well, I'd try and save all the children. He said, but it would be impossible. I said, yeah, but I would do whatever I could. And this is really the mindset of the people who are pushing for, the changes to these laws in relation to the confidentiality of our communications. What my psychology professor said to me then was, well, wouldn't it make more sense to go up the river and find out how the children have fallen in the river in the first place? And this is the solutions that we need to be considering. We need to be looking at why people do these terrible things in the first place and trying to prevent them from occurring in the first place, rather than dealing with the consequences, the disastrous consequences as they may be, and focusing on that instead. So instead of focusing on weakening communication, confidentiality of communications, we should be spending more money doing more research, which is woefully lacking in this space, on the reasons why people offend in this way in the first place, on how we can change the culture and society which has existed for hundreds of years. The abuse of children is not something which is new. It's just something which is much easier to report on nowadays. So why do we do this? What can we do to fix this and prevent this from happening in the first place? And then even if we don't manage to find a solution, there are other ways that we can help deal with the consequences without compromising on the confidentiality of our communications. There are modern technologies and modern techniques, such as, for example, homomorphic encryption, which would allow for the inspection of communications to detect this type of abuse without undermining the encryption and the confidentiality of those communications. So going down the route where we weaken the security, which has been discussed already by the previous two speakers, to the point where it is impossible to determine who is going to be able to access those weaknesses. It is impossible to prevent bad actors from using those weaknesses. So instead of moving down a path which has a zero-sum situation for us. Why don't we move to a more positive-sum situation where we deal with the issues at the core, try and research and discover how we can fix these inherent social problems in the first place, and use modern technologies and modern techniques which do not require us to compromise on the confidentiality and the privacy of our communications. Because if we don't do that, we will find in a few generations' time that we do not have autonomy anymore. There is no trust. There is no freedom. Everybody is just a cog in the machine. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your views and experience on this issue, and for reminding us also of how strongly privacy is connected with other freedoms that we enjoy. Let's now bring in Neeti Biyani with Internet Society.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I completely agree with the previous three speakers when they talk about the need to preserve privacy, the need to preserve our fundamental freedoms. I will not repeat what they've already said and highlighted so very brilliantly, but I will take a moment to talk about the economic aspects of encryption and how all of us users, businesses, rely on encryption as the strongest tool to protect us today. You know, as we know, the internet is a critical global resource. It brings us incredible benefits, but provided it's accessible and trustworthy. Cryptographic technology like encryption plays a crucial role in maintaining the trustworthiness of the internet by protecting the integrity and confidentiality of data. It underpins the authentication protocols, digital certificates, it secures our communication protocols, and it protects access to resources and data at rest. The Internet Society, which I'm representing today, is of the position that encryption is the strongest and most widely available form of privacy and security. It has been so since centuries, and it continues to be an extremely valuable tool in our digital age. This is why I am so vocal about a dangerous trend that's growing fast across the world. Policymakers are using the excuse of addressing illegal and harmful content that Alexander's already alluded to. They want to fight crime online, but using this excuse, governments are passing legislations to break encryption, and these legislations are unwittingly undermining privacy, individual and national security, economic growth and innovation, safety of vulnerable groups like women and children that the legislations aim to protect, and trustworthiness of communications. To be blunt, if these legislations had happened in authoritarian countries, I wouldn't have been surprised. But we are witnessing a thrilling drift. Governments such as Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom have either passed or are discussing legislation that require mandatory internet logs to be stored at the ISP or the data center level. Germany has passed legislation for mandatory man-in-the-middle access for law enforcement. And the United States and my very own country, India, are pushing for mandatory encryption backdoors. The internet is tied to the economy in every single way we can think about. Most commerce has some critical component that exists online. Whether it is the entire transaction or simple logistical steps along the way, commerce is driven by data traversing networks to and from devices. And therefore, it becomes crucial that we keep people's data safe for the sake of privacy and security, but also for the sake of the economy. But this, however, goes beyond transactions on e-commerce. Data stored in computers is encrypted for different purposes, keeping industrial or intellectual property safe, managing HR data, ensuring the integrity of medical reports and medical records, and journalist investigation. Are we conscious about what we risk if we weaken all of these legitimate purposes? Regulations that weaken or undermine encryption create an unfavorable legal environment for internet companies to thrive. They create an unsafe and unfavorable environment for users to interact with one another. And such legislations incur unplanned costs that go unaccounted for. Products and services that rely on privacy and encryption also provide infrastructure for local businesses and individuals to access and engage with the marketplace. The ambiguity and the unpredictability of such legislation also harms the business environment for companies and businesses that use these platforms' infrastructure. We might not be aware, but encryption is the backbone of the digital economy that contributes 16% of the global GDP. The encryption software industry alone stood at $5 billion in 2019 to meet the needs of businesses that depend on strong encryption to keep their customers' interests safe. Laws that attack encryption and privacy stifle local and big tech industry, and they tarnish countries' reputation globally, both of which impact the economy. Legislations which require businesses to circumvent security measures impact small businesses the most. It is small businesses that will bear the brunt of implications that this has on global competitiveness. A recent report by the Law and Economics Consulting Associates has analyzed the economic impacts an Australian law called TOLA Act, the Telecommunications and Other Legislation Amendment, which expanded government authority and capabilities to circumvent digital data protections. This act created a framework by which law enforcement and intelligence agencies could request or require information technology providers to assist in accessing the content of encrypted data. This report proves that TOLA has the potential to result in significant economic harm for the Australian economy, which runs into billions of dollars, producing negative spillovers that will amplify such harm globally. These economic harms are broad-based, and they're likely to be realized in the coming years. To close my remarks, I'd just like to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that these policies seriously affect the internet's health and resilience, and they have a global outreach going far beyond local boundaries. Wrong policies that impact the openness, the security of the internet will be felt far beyond the EU's jurisdiction in the age where our lives, data, and the economy sit upon the internet's infrastructure. Thank you so much.